I grew up in a very happy, kind of creatively, progressively observant home. I was home for Shabbos every Friday night for dinner, no matter if I had, field hockey practice. I certainly was inculcated with an attachment to Israel, which I think I still have. And it was, kind of maybe like the feeling of having an exotic relative in, some distant place.
I grew up in a typical middle-class American Jewish household in the Boston suburbs. In my case, the Jewishness was minimal. My mother hated all religions, in particular the one she was brought up in. My father didn't care one way or the other. But I think I was very conscious of Jewishness, not as a religion, but as an ethnicity. Jews came to the United States and suffered discrimination as Jews, and they were sensitive to that. And many American Jews thought, hey, this is not a good thing. We shouldn't suffer it, and neither should Black Americans or any other group. And so it was that universalist aspect of Jewish culture that I identified with. You can react to the Holocaust by saying, never again will it happen to us. Or you can react by saying, never again should it happen to anyone.
My father was to this day, very pro-Israel. And pro-Israel doesn't even begin to describe it, Israel can do no wrong. And I was sentenced, I would say, to Hebrew school for 8 years for a crime I don't think I committed. Prayers, including thank you God for not making me a woman, etc. Posters or maps of the state of Israel that, of course, did not perfectly delineate the land known as Judea and Samaria. So I graduated with not just very pro-Israeli views, but very anti-Arab views, I would say.
I came from a small town in the deep south. I was raised to be very proud of being Jewish. I was told by my parents from day one that if I was attacked or targeted in any way by anti-Semites, the problem was their problem, not my problem. There was no disguising or hiding the fact that we were Jewish. We were proud of being Jewish. Our community was proud of being Jewish. I was never in any way critical of Israel. I believed completely that that Israel was a small, valiant nation, overwhelmingly, facing overwhelming odds and so on. I was horrified in the first, I think it was a contemporary civilization class. One of the students who was a Jewish student and my professor had a discussion about the state of Israel that was very critical of Israel, and it's probably the first time I ever heard anybody really talk about Palestinians as opposed to Arabs, and it was a shock. I was furious about it. I wrote my professor a very angry letter, sort of saying, and I called my parents, and I was very, very upset by the whole thing. And it took a long time, and I would say probably 10 years.
I was born on the east side of Cleveland in a very large Jewish community. My father would get anxious if somebody non-Jewish walked in the house. What's the last name? What's the name? Well, who are they from? Are they Jewish? They're not Jewish? Maybe a little Jewish. If it was a little Jewish, it was better. A little Jewish, Jewish. So I didn't understand. There were like two different messages I got. The Jews are only safe if they hang together. We belong to this community. These are the only safe people. On the other hand, we're in favor of civil rights. The blacks should never suffer like the Jews suffered. It wasn't until I was 20 years old that I stayed up all night arguing with a man who also came from my same part of town. He said that the state of Israel was not substantially different from apartheid South Africa. And my first response was to say, that's absolutely not true. And I was appalled, and I couldn't believe it because he came from the same place I did, and didn't he know? And in fact, we were both taught that the Nazi genocide against the Jews mandated the founding of the State of Israel as a sanctuary for the Jewish people. So if you started to call into question the mandate for the State of Israel, it seemed that you were insensitive to the plight of the Jews, that you underestimated anti-Semitism, that you didn't take seriously what the Nazis had actually done. So the idea that one might absolutely and unconditionally abhor the Nazi genocide, not only, by the way, against the Jews, but the communists, the gypsies, the disabled, and the rest, and object to the basis of the founding of the State of Israel, took a long time. It was as if to take that linkage apart was to cleave my own soul, was to literally come apart, to tear myself apart, to tear myself asunder.
The week that the UN passed its Zionism equals racism resolution, a kid on my hall taunted me with that, going, Zionism equals racism. And I remember feeling, so upset and disturbed by that, and of course disturbed by the resolution itself. So to have been taunted by that student, Larry something, remember his curly hair, felt like something about me and my identity was being challenged very deeply. And I don't think it was nice that he did that or good that he did that, but it did make me think a lot, and it stayed with me a lot.
I remember at Oberlin, there would be people protesting during certain, they would be protesting the catastrophe. I can't remember what the Palestinian word, or Arab word for it is. And I remember, even though I was no longer sort of just pro-Israel at all costs, I remember in my mind reeling about, because I spent 8 years of Hebrew school being taught that these people have no rights. They are the invented community that Newt Gingrich so eloquently speaks of. And here they were, and they weren't invented. And their parents had lost their homes, and they were exiles in a sense, in a way the Jews have always been exiles. And so at first you see the kafir, you see it, and as a 19-year-old kid who spent half his life being told that you are the chosen people, and there's nothing that you can't do after the Holocaust to create a space for yourself in the world. But then here are these people who are just like you, and they're in your intro to sociology class, and you're exchanging notes with them, and they're just people.